Tonight we're in Newcastle and welcome to Question Time. Good evening to you at home, to our audience here and to our panel, the Universities and Science Minister David Willetts, Labour's Shadow Health Minister Liz Kendall, the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Democrats Simon Hughes, the former Director of the Centre for Policy Studies co-founded by Margaret Thatcher, Jill Kirby, and the comedian and columnist for The Independent, Mark Steele. Good. Thanks very much. Amy Astle has our first question tonight. Amy.
Do you agree with George Osborne's comment that the British economy is out of intensive care?
Is the British economy, as George Osborne said this week, out of intensive care? Liz Kendall, do you think so?
You won't be surprised to hear me say no, I don't agree with that. We have failed to get the growth we need, that this country desperately needs, this region needs, to create the jobs, to get banks lending to businesses again. We've had growth of about 1% when the government thought it would be 6%. You've got 10% of the population here in the North East unemployed. We've got families facing a desperate struggle to pay the bills at the end of the week. And what I thought about this week's spending review was not only was it a sign of the past failure of this government, but it is really not building the country we need for the future. It's not, whatever the government said today, providing the infrastructure we need, the proper jobs programmes to help people get into work. It's not giving real power to the regions with regional banks to get lending going here. And so I feel it's not only a problem of the past, but what people really want is hope that things can be better in future, and that's what was sadly lacking.
Okay. What, David Willetts, what did George Osborne mean then by out of intensive care?
Well, it meant that there's still a hell of a lot to do, but we are making progress. I mean, we've eliminated about a third of the massive deficit that we inherited, the biggest of any advanced country. We have succeeded in getting jobs growing, over 1 million extra jobs, but we want to do more. We have got the economy growing, but it's very modest growth because there's this massive overhang of debt of the government and debt of individuals. So we're moving in the right direction, but there's an enormous amount more to do. And what George was talking about today was the extra things we are doing. So
can I just pick you up on one thing? Out of intensive care, it's June 2013. Back in November 2010, Osborne said, Britain is out of the financial danger zone. March 2011, we're now able to set off on the route from rescue to reform. December 2012, the British economy is healing. I mean, he can go on saying these things till he's blue in the face, but where's the, where's the evidence?
The danger zone was that back in 2010, we had the same interest rates as Greece and Spain, and we had a larger budget deficit. The danger zone was going the way those countries have since gone, and we have avoided that by having a plan and sticking to it. So yes, we were in a danger zone in 2010, and we are out of it now because we've got a credible plan. But there is still a lot to do to develop and deliver that plan, and that's why what we have done this week is say, yeah, we're going to invest more in schools, we're going to invest more in science, we're going to invest more in roads and rails. So absolutely, we can raise our growth rate and keep on growing and grow more and create even more jobs.
But you talk as if it was all extra spending. In fact, you're making cuts, aren't you? Well, you're not making cuts. There seems to be some dispute about whether you really are or not.
What we're doing is we're continuing to bring down the deficit, and it takes time to bring down the deficit, but we're making progress in bringing down the deficit. We're a third of the way through. We're increasing the jobs, and what we're really trying to do is get more investment coming into Britain, and we're succeeding in that. We've got to do better in the export markets that are growing, Brazil, China, Russia, and we're doing that. We're growing our trade there, but we were so far behind. We had such a massive amount of debt. We were so far behind in those big international markets that the job isn't yet over.
Well, we'll hear from members of the audience, but another member of our panel, Jill Kirby, do you think the government's on the right track? And as George Osborne
well, I'm listening to David sitting here. The debt is still getting bigger in real terms and as a proportion of GDP. George Osborne hasn't tackled the debt. The deficit, he managed to peel back a bit in the first couple of years, but actually since then the deficit has drifted up again. He's not getting anywhere with the biggest problem that he's got to tackle. Yes, he's made some of the right noises yesterday, and he's talking very positively about the importance of growth and the private sector jobs replacing lost public sector jobs. It all makes very good sense in terms of getting the economy back on its feet. But I think he's still got a very hazardous path ahead, and I think he's very well aware that the reason he's able to go on borrowing so much money is because interest rates are so low, and he can get hold of that money partly because the government has fixed the market by endlessly printing money, and partly because it's forcing pension funds to invest more in
what would you have him do?
government bonds.
What would you have him do that he didn't do?
I would have him actually talk about cutting seriously the amount of government expenditure, and he's simply not doing that.
In what? In what area?
He's just managing the enormous expenditure.
Where would you have him cut?
I would have him completely restructure the health service and actually consider to what extent there should be co-payments. I would have him restructure the welfare system to consider how we should base payments out on contributions to a much greater extent.
And would you win an election on these policies?
I would actually have him cutting out a few departments that the government can't afford to fund. I think
which departments would you cut out?
I think the Department of Culture, Media and Sport might be a good candidate. We've got an Arts Council which can hand out the money. There's no need for a government department on top of it. It's simply not realistic to go on borrowing so much money, and the time will come when he won't be able to get hold of all this cheap money. And then he will be forced, or whoever's in charge by then, probably somebody else, or might well be somebody else, will have to make emergency cuts.
But Jill, the question I really want to put to you is what about the political dynamic? What about the political dynamic of this? Can a chancellor do the things that you say, even if in theory, economic theory, you think you're right? In practical politics, would it be sensible to do?
George Osborne came to power promising to look radically at the state of the deficit to get the economy back to health by actually changing the way government does things, doing a lot less through debt and taxpayer money. He hasn't actually done that. He's not started to think differently. And he missed the opportunity which he had at the beginning. I think he knows now he's up against an electoral term, so he's got to create a sense of well-being to go up to the next election. But I think it's really disappointing.
We've brought the deficit down from 160 billion to 110 billion, and I think we're following a prudent middle way between Liz and Jill, and I think we've just got to stick to our plan.
All right. Mark Steele, and then I come to members of the audience, because I know you've all got experience of exactly what's being talked about here, but Mark.
Well, if it's out of intensive care, David, why are you making so many cuts then to people who are very often the poorest people in society? Why are you doing that if it's out of intensive care? Because it seems to me that this spending review is a continuation of the strategy that the government has had ever since it came in, which has been to say the country is in debt and therefore we need to get money back. And who are we going to get the money back from? The poor. That's who. Yeah. It's the poor. It seems to be the belief of this government that the people with all the money in society are the poor. This is mainstream economics in this country now, is that the poor are richer than the rich. And therefore we have to get the money back from them. And I wonder what world you're in when you say it's out of intensive care. The cuts that are happening now and even more as a result of this review. Talking about people like firefighters everywhere, fire stations shutting down. Were these the people who caused the debt? Firemen, were they the ones causing it? Running up bills of billions of pounds and gambling half the economy on the stock exchange in between fighting fires? I noticed there's a swimming pool in Newcastle that's been shut. Why on earth should it be the swimming pool in Newcastle that gets shut when it's the bankers that caused all this? Am I wrong? Are we all wrong? Maybe it was people swimming in the pool who in between links were destabilising the currency by gambling $500 million on the stock exchange. It's absurd. And the reason that this is pertinent now is because the amount of money that's going to be saved by the government on this spending announcement this week is not all that much, but it is important. And it's important, I think, because it's about a culture that your government is managing to uphold, which is a culture to say that it's the poor to blame, and what we'll do is we'll make all the different sections of the people who aren't the rich, who didn't cause the crisis, all blame each other. We'll say, right, you're on benefits, so you're to blame. The people who have still got pensions, we'll say they're to blame. Meanwhile, in the real world, where you can't just sit there and say it's out of intensive care, there is a very small minority of people who are richer than ever,
all right,
and somehow you leave them alone.
Okay, thank you. Simon Hughes, do you have some sympathy with what Mark Steele is saying?
Yeah, well, of course I have some sympathy, but he's wrong on the facts. I mean, he's good rhetoric, and he's good South London resident, and stand by him. But let me take you on, Mark, on some of the facts, because I'm sympathetic. I have a constituency, my constituency. It's like many parts of the North East. It economically struggles. Lots of people on low incomes in South London, the old docks, working class constituency. The reality is that pensioners have been specifically looked after by the government. The state pension has gone up more since the general election than it's ever gone up since it was first created. They've been exempted from all the other difficulties in this parliament, and pensioners are one of the groups. Secondly, of course people on the bottom struggle most, but that's why we lifted the tax threshold so that nobody pays any income tax on anything next year up to 10 grand. And I know I, like you, want to clobber the rich, but the facts are that the rich are... The facts are, Liz, that the rich...
Give it a go, Simon.
No, I am giving it a go, and
why,
we are.
Why have you got rid of the 50p top rate of tax?
Now, Liz, you weren't there in the last part.
Why aren't you repeating the banker's bonus tax?
Your party has a completely indefensible position on the rich. Your party reduced capital gains tax.
We're saying tax the bankers' bonuses again. We're saying introduce a mansion tax, which I thought was your policy.
Let me answer. Your party, when in government, you weren't there, your party, when in government, dropped the capital gains tax from 40 pence in the pound to 18 pence in the pound. Your party, when in government, had a lower high tax rate, top tax rate, 40p in the pound.
Why are you cutting the 50p tax rate?
Liz, just let me finish.
Come on, Simon, you can...
40p in the pound was the top tax rate for the whole period of the Labour government, apart from 36 days. It is currently higher than that, and rich people pay more in tax in every year of this parliament than in any year under Labour. And the answer to both Mark and Liz, who come from different positions, because Mark, like me, was as critical of the Blair government as I was, and the Blair government, we had the biggest bonuses, we had ridiculous successes in the city, which were unacceptable. And we were left with a less equal society in the North East and everywhere else after a Labour government than even after the Tories.
Your government is making the gap bigger.
No, we're not. No, we're not, Liz. We're absolutely not.
Newcastle has seen its central government grant funding for local councils cut by £218 per person, compared to a national average of £130 and £27 cut in Woking and
what's your point?
My point is that the inequalities are widening because of what's happening to the government.
The facts show they're not widening.
All right, well now look, hold on.
Just one last quick point.
Let's hear from the people here from Newcastle and what they say. You said there, over there. Now we've got a number of people with their hands up. Just in your experience. Go on, far away.
I think that the purpose of tax in some ways is try and get as much capital as possible for providing for health services, education and so forth. Problem is, if you do tax the rich, which sounds good in principle, take as much away from them as you can, they'll leave. They'll go to, they have the ability to go abroad, they have the ability to not to evade tax, but to avoid it in certain ways, and so it can be very difficult to just say tax the rich and you'll get money. And
do you think the economy is out of intensive care? Well, I mean, are you optimistic about the way things are going?
Well, traditionally, when people come out of intensive care, they're not flatlining. Usually, that means that they're dead. So I don't think we can really say it's out of intensive care if it's not growing as much as we'd like.
Let's just hear some more points if I come back. With spectacles there. The woman with spectacles.
I would like to know what the Conservatives are going to do for mothers and fathers that have children that they need to look after. The jobs creation that you are created are all temporary jobs. That's all we get is temporary jobs, and the jobs that we have to have are the most inappropriate jobs for me. My son has to go to an after-school centre for me to go to work, and I have to pay for that myself because I get nothing from the government whatsoever, because apparently I earn too much money. But can I just ask, what is your idea a good job for a mother, because the job I have to do, I have to work in the afternoon, and my son has to go to an after-school centre, which I have to pay for. So basically, I'm going to work for nothing.
David Willetts, can you answer the point?
Yeah, the answer is that I don't know what your income is and what your personal circumstances are, but we still have tax credits. We've increased the element of the child tax credit that is of most value for low-income families. But yes, we are having to take tough decisions to save overall on tax credits on welfare, and that's because, and I would like just to respond to what Mark said, because you can't carry on indefinitely borrowing £120 billion a year because you're spending more than you're receiving in taxes. You can't do that indefinitely. Any mature government has to confront the reality that that is no way to run the economy.
Liz Kendall says you're borrowing more, am I right here?
No, we inherited 160, it's down to about 110, 120, and it's still going down. But Mark raised a very fair challenge. He said that these cuts are falling disproportionately on low-income people. The independent analysis of the decisions we've announced this week shows the opposite. It shows that it is the richest 20% of the population who will lose the most as a result of these decisions. And we are endlessly trying to make these incredibly tough and painful decisions in a way that does least damage to the social fabric of this country. We have inherited a mess, just as I have to say we often do after Labour. We're trying to sort it out, and sort it out in a way that preserve the social fabric and strengthens our economy. Right. That is our plan.
The woman in pink there in the second row from the back.
I'd just like to know what you guys thought with regards to the Chancellor's previous comment about being out of the danger zone, how you feel whether society is going to be in the danger zone with policing, courts and prisons having budgets cut yet again.
Well, just on that, we did hear
Let
these...
Simon Hughes answer that one, because you're both in the coalition, so to speak, up to a point. Simon.
Well, both parties in the coalition. We joined the coalition. There wasn't a majority of any party in Parliament. Labour lost the election.
Yeah, we know that.
No, because we wanted to deal with the crisis, which was enormous. Now, the answer to the lady's question is, thank goodness, crime figures have come down more in the last 4 years than ever in my lifetime, and therefore, mercifully, we may not need as many people in the front line as we did, and I hope it goes on in that direction. We've got to keep paying for the key jobs. The firefighters in London should be kept. They should be kept, and it's Boris's plan to reduce the spending for them, which is wrong. The economy, I think, is very gently easing out of intensive care. I'm not over-optimistic. I'm not naive. I know the unemployment position in the North East, but I know also that in the North East, unemployment, though it's high, 10% has fallen further than anywhere else. I know in the North East, you're the only region in England which actually net exports more than you import. And I know that Hitachi and Nissan and people are investing. And there are lots more jobs. I understand the lady saying they've got to be proper jobs, but they're going to have to be private sector jobs, and that's why we've tried to encourage the private sector by reducing national insurance. So Simon, we're going in the right direction, but it's a 5-year plan.
Thank you.
It's a 5-year plan.
We have to... I'm not accusing you of making a speech. Don't think that for a moment, but I think all the panellists, if you could just speak a bit more briefly, we'd hear more from the people of Newcastle. The man there on the right.
The Labour Party can't decide whether it would borrow more or less. I thought it was a Damascene conversion last Saturday when Little Ed said, oh yeah, we agree now, finally, for the need for expenditure cuts. It was ironically called discipline in the party, because within 24 hours, Big Ed had decided, yes, we will spend more. Yes, we will borrow more, and how you get out of debt by borrowing more is beyond me. These people, those two people, should never be allowed through the gates of Downing Street again.
Liz Kendall, what's the answer?
Well,
or your answer?
We've been very clear we are not going to be borrowing more on day-to-day spending in 2015-16.
Sorry, can I just give you the quote? Would Balls borrow more after the 2015 election? He said, of course.
On day-to-day spending.
Of course.
On the day-to-day spending. I think that people can see the difference
just to clarify, what do you mean the difference? Well,
between investing in our roads, rail, infrastructure, school building, all of those sorts of things which are about building for the future. I think people can see the difference between
but you still have to borrow and pay interest on the borrowing,
I would say, as I've said before, the government is already borrowing more. Look, the IMF...
You're going to borrow more than they're borrowing.
The IMF says...
Are you going to borrow more than they're borrowing? I don't understand
We're not going to be borrowing for the day-to-day...
No, but you're still borrowing. I mean, if I borrow to build a house, I'm still borrowing the money.
Borrowing more, 245 billion
but you're going to borrow more than
they said. What the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, has said is we should be bringing forward £10 billion of investment in this year and next to get the economy going again. My worry about what the government's done on infrastructure is these are projects for 5, 6, 7 years' time. All the announcements today, many of them they made 2 or 3 years ago. You know, they said in this region 31 schools were supposed to be built as part of the Priority Schools programme. Not a single one has started.
Right. Jill Kirby,
it doesn't make sense.
Jill Kirby, what do you make of this borrowing more to invest? Is that sound economics in your view?
It's all debt, and frankly, I'm as sceptical as you about the infrastructure announcements that we had today. A lot of them were recycled. But in the end, the debt is continuing to grow. And as I've said before, George Osborne has debt on easy terms at the moment. That won't last, and the situation will get very difficult.
So what's going to happen in your view?
We can't keep borrowing money to pay welfare bills, for example. And whilst the lady, rightly points out it's hardly worth her while going to work in order to pay for childcare, the situation is that where is the money going to come from? Should the government borrow some more money to pay for your childcare so it's worth you going out to work? I don't know. It's quite a difficult test, because when you look at the amount of money that's being used now to service the debt interest, it's more than we spend on education every year. It's a hell of a lot of money just going to service debt, and that will only grow unless we start looking rather differently.
Okay, hold on a second. But you said that the spending on the NHS, which the Conservatives or the coalition have ring-fenced, was something that should be looked at. David Willetts, is this guarantee to ring-fence, protect the NHS and education and overseas aid, is that something that is going to last beyond the next election? Is this a commitment, a permanent commitment, or is this just for the moment?
Every government sets out their plans for life.
I know that, that's why I'm asking the question.
But I would be very surprised if we did not repeat our commitment on the NHS, because the NHS is incredibly important to this country. But we have when we go to the election, we will set out our expenditure
You'll be
plans.
surprised, but it's not yet decided that will be Tory policy after this Parliament.
The Conservative Party is committed to the NHS. We have set out plans
It's not quite the same, is it?
We have set out plans out to 15-16. After that, of course, we believe in the NHS, and I would be very surprised indeed if when we produce our plans, they don't involve maintaining the performance we've already done.
Liz Kendall,
we have a clear view that you can't set out the plans until after the next.
What's Labour's view on NHS ring-fence spending? That's the one question I want to ask you.
We could get much better value for money if we join together the £105 billion on the NHS and the £15 billion in social care. If you had a system where instead of further and further cuts to the help people, older and disabled people need to help them live at home, and if that's cut, they end up in hospital. We're seeing big increases in the number of old people in hospital. That is terrible for them and for their families, and it ends up costing more.
But that's exactly what the government has
addressed. What you've done is you've taken £3 billion, which you've already wasted on a top-down reorganisation in the NHS, and said we'll join it up with social care, but that's a tiny amount compared to the £120 billion. We could get better care and better value for money if we got those services working together.
I think there must be a lot of people that, if they were watching this, who are going to be hit by some of the announcements this week, who will wonder what on earth this conversation is about. Just one example. One of the announcements was that unemployment benefit will now be paid a bit later than it was. It would go up another 3 days. Is that right? Now, that it was presented as if this means, now it'll be 3 days after you become unemployed before you receive the money, although it's already 3 weeks, so it'll be 3 days beyond that. So that's 3.5 weeks now from becoming unemployed before you receive anything. That might not be much to the people on the panel. To the people suffering, that is absolutely disastrous, and the only people who are going to win out of that will be the payday loans people, the Wonga people. They're the only people to suffer. And yet, if I just say two things about that. First of all, Ed Balls has been on the television, on the radio all day saying, well, of course we won't change that and being very equivocal about it. He's supposed to be the opposition. Someone should give him a slap and say, you remember, you are the opposition. You are allowed to oppose. You are allowed to do that. And the other thing I'll say, coming back to the gentleman over here who said this, I mean, now, this is the comment that we get quite often, isn't it? We can't tax the rich and so on because they'll go away. We're talking about people, for example, and that's why the culture of this is so important. Philip Green, for example, who paid himself £1.2 billion in one paycheck and paid it through an account in his wife's name in Monaco, which meant that he saved £300 million in tax in one go. Why aren't the government having a go at him about that? And of course, the answer comes back.
All right, Mark.
And the answer comes back every time, well, we can't do that because we have to be prepared to pay the global market rate for greedy bastards.
Complete nonsense. One of the other measures which the Chancellor's announced this week is absolutely more steps to tackle the problem of people who aren't paying the taxes that are due, and we're expecting to collect more taxes because we're being far more energetic at collecting.
More people in HMRC doing the means testing of child benefit than you have cracking down on the tax. That doesn't make sense.
Hang on. David's wrong. What we're doing, which you never did, is go after all the tax avoiders and people.
Why has HMRC never taken a single internet company to court? They've never taken a single internet company.
The culture of these governments.
All right, one at a time.
All the time.
I can tell you it's my culture.
But that's what's so
one at a time. Listen, if you all speak at once, nobody can hear either of you.
Just
or
me then.
any of you. No, just you then, Mark.
I think that's what's so sad about it, Simon. It may well be your culture, and I believe you probably go home every night and think, what on earth am I doing?
I want to go to the man up there in the second row from the back. Silence panel for a moment, please. Yes.
I just wonder if more extreme austerity cuts are needed to accelerate the payment of the deficit back to the people who were lending it off.
Can you say you think there should be more cuts?
I think there should be slightly more extreme cuts, so it will accelerate the payment of the loan back to the actual.
It would be interesting to know what the audience thought. Do you think that expenditure is being savagely cut, as most of the press and media are telling us? I mean, do you think these are savage cuts? Would it surprise you to learn that the total public expenditure cuts over 4 years represent about 2%? And back in the 1970s, Dennis Healey cut public expenditure by 4% in 1 year. And currently, public expenditure is more than double what it was then in real terms.
But Jill, although
we're talking of 2%,
it's true,
2% over 4 years.
Jill,
that is not savage cutting.
It's true that we will have spent more as a total of total expenditure on public expenditure in this government percentage than Labour did under Tony Blair. Yeah, so we're spending more. But I don't think anybody here would support what I think you're arguing for, which is suddenly we start paying for the NHS services, we suddenly start dismantling the welfare state. You have to get a balance, and there are basic things which you have to support, and therefore the answer to our friend over there is you can't start paying back loads of deficit immediately overnight, even though we were borrowing £1 for every £3, £4 we were spending, because we want to keep the NHS, we want to keep public services as far as possible.
Do you want to come back on the point?
Yeah, but why can't we semi-privatise the NHS? Like, make the people who can afford it pay for it, and the lowest, like a cap on it.
Because it's
it's quite clearly not working, though, is it?
David Willetts, answer his
I
question.
think there is a clear middle way here. Liz, though she wouldn't say it explicitly, thinks we should borrow more. Jill and you think we should borrow less. We have got a plan for bringing borrowing down, and we've got to bring it down steadily so that interest rates remain low.
Why can't you do it faster, as Jill and he are suggesting?
Because we have got a track which has enabled us to keep interest rates low. In other words, we can borrow this amount, and the markets believe we've got a plan that we're sticking to get a grip on the public finances. So we can borrow this amount.
A huge amount more, £245 billion more than planned.
Let's be clear.
Huge amount.
We were borrowing
because
about. We were borrowing 160. It's now about 110. We're borrowing 11% of our national income. It's now about 7.5% of our national income. So it's still incredibly high by Britain's historical standards. It's incredibly high compared with how governments used to operate. But compared with what we inherited, we're heading in the right direction.
But David, can you clarify what is the argument against doing what Jill is suggesting and he's suggesting, which is going faster? Is it that you're afraid politically of taking the radical action that would be needed?
No, because
Jill has been suggesting things that you could do, which you say you can't.
What we're doing is we're judging what it is that we can do that enables us to maintain standards in our schools. What it is that enables us to protect the health service. We are a nationwide insurance pool. We all put in so that we enable to enjoy healthcare without paying for it when we go to the hospital. That is a principle that unites most people in Britain and which I believe in, and we're trying to save and bring down the deficit without jeopardising important principles like that which holds this nation together. That is what the coalition is.
You said in the second row here. Yes, I have 2 or 3 members of the audience now. You, sir.
Yeah, I don't want to appear rude or anything, but I expect what I'm hearing from certain members of the panel. I know their agenda and so on. But Simon Hughes, I can guarantee, in 2 or 3 years' time, when the Tories and the Liberals have been thrown out, will be back on your programme saying how he disagreed with that. I'd rather him say it tonight in front of us now, because he's to the left of the Liberal Party, so that's what I think about.
But listen, a coalition... Just very quick. In a coalition, you negotiate things. I'll give you one example.
If you won your seat,
let me give you one example.
If you win your seat, which you won't...
Let me give... Well, let's have less of the person. Let me give you an example, policy example. The first budget George Osborne announced, he said after year 1 of people being unemployed, they would lose 10% of their job seekers' allowance as an incentive. I said immediately unacceptable, my colleagues said unacceptable, and when the bill appeared, it wasn't in the bill. Because some things for me are red lines. And my job in the party, and my job as a Liberal Democrat, and as a Liberal of 30, 40 years, is to make sure we have the sort of society that Beveridge fought for and Lloyd George fought for, that have a greater fairness. It wasn't delivered by Mrs Thatcher, it wasn't delivered by Tony Blair. I want it to be delivered, and we're actually, in the circumstances, not doing too badly, and the alternative would have been a Tory-only government,
so do you
and you
agree
would have
with
been much
everything
less
now
happy with that, sir.
Do you agree with everything now? Everything?
No, of course I don't agree with everything, because in a coalition you have to negotiate.
What don't you agree with? Tell me then.
Because you do... Well, I can tell you...
Because you'll come back in 3 years' time saying this, that and the other. You will, if you win your seat.
Let me take the example that Mark gave. I'm not persuaded that we ought to defer the period before people get their benefits, as was proposed this week. I'm not persuaded about that. It's not actually going to mean you're going to get it 3 weeks or 4 weeks, but I think that probably we ought to make...
If it's linked to universal credit, it could be, which is paid
and therefore
by a
I'm
month.
not as wobbly. I'm not as wobbly as the Labour leadership would say, oh, it may be a good idea. So that's a disagreement.
You're wishy-washy. Why the red line wasn't to go into an election promising to abolish fees and then to treble them. That didn't seem to be a red line.
Okay. Because the man in spectacles there, in the 4th row, on the gangway there, you, sir.
If you look at the problem realistically, now, because of what happened after the financial crash, my children and my children's children will have to live with a catastrophic amount of debt. Personally, I blame that on Labour. No offence to you, madam. But I don't want to hear what the problems are. I want to hear solutions. Yeah. I don't think the solution is more borrowing, because it just doesn't make logic sense. I don't believe stealing people's money through the art of taxation works either. What I see is the problem that we've had for the past 20 years is that the state thinks that it can do everything. It spends pretty much about half of everything that's spent in Britain today. And what I want is the state to be reduced, private sector to take control, and individuals to be the centre of society.
Okay. So you're with Jill Kirby, really, on this?
Absolutely.
Yes, and the woman there in 3rd row down. Yes, and I think we better move on to another question. That this is very, very interesting. Yes, you.
Oh. I'm just interested because you keep talking about growth of jobs and the economy, but I want to know when we're going to see that in the North East, because it seems that London is benefiting from that, but not us.
What do you think the position in the North East is? What's the position in Newcastle?
It's quite hopeless, really. Like, we're talking about cuts and we're talking about, you mentioned the city pool, and that's part of our heritage up here, and that's just been closed down. And it's just, my place of work this morning announced redundancies via email. That's how bad it's getting, and I just want to know when the North East, or even anywhere outside of London, is really going to see the effects of this so-called growth.
Are you just a sorry question? Are you employed in the private sector or in the public sector?
I'm employed by a college.
By college, right? Okay.
The projection is 30,000 extra jobs in the North East. And talking to my colleagues on the City Council, there is absolutely no reason why Labour have to close the pool in the middle of the city. If they diverted some of the health money, the pool could have stayed open. just as if they'd reduced the hours the libraries could have stayed open. That's a decision made by Newcastle, and other councils have not closed their pools and they've not closed their libraries. And you should take that out on the city.
And can I just say, and it's a very fair question, this morning I was at the old brewery site in the centre of Newcastle, where there is a massive development underway with school kids, and we're celebrating the start of that development. I then went to the university to say we're putting £6 million of extra investment into medical research here, because we've got the funding for it, because there are illnesses which medics in Newcastle are going to be more able to tackle than anywhere else in the world. We're going to invest in the industries and prospects of the future.
We're going to move on now, because otherwise we'll just be on this one topic, important as it is. You can join in tonight's debate. I'm sure you know this if you're a regular watcher of Question Time, either by texting us or by twittering, which is the most popular way, our hashtag BBCQT. You can follow us at BBC Question Time equally. If you're texting, 83981 is the way to comment, and the red button, which apparently is running a bit slow at the moment, will tell you what others are saying, but you will find out ultimately. Let's go on to another question now. This is from Chris Smith, please. Chris Smith.
Edward Snowden, hero or villain?
Edward Snowden, the whistleblower, of course, now in Moscow airport, apparently, having told the whole world how surveillance of the internet operated. Is he a hero or a villain? Mark Steele.
Well, if it's a one-word answer, then hero, I would say. I think some of the most fascinating people in history are those who go through the system. They are part of the system. They feel that they feel that the system is working. They go along with authority. I mean, he was in the army, wasn't he, Snowden, and was going to be in the Iraq War. You know, he didn't see anything wrong with it. And then something happens, and they realise that all is not as they were brought up to believe it would be. And that happened to him, and he realised that there was this enormous surveillance going on, far beyond what the government was letting on about. And so he became a rebel about it. And he certainly, you know, it's hardly benefited him. I mean, the poor bloke's had to leave his house, his family and so on, and now he's somewhere in Moscow. And I think that where the argument gets diverted here is if it's along the lines of, well, we need this surveillance because we need to have national security. Now, no, that may be the case to a certain extent. However, what he seems to have picked up on is that the amount of surveillance was way, way, way beyond that. It wasn't just that they were trawling through people so that they could keep us safe by looking at everybody's emails and texts and so on. It was that it was way beyond that. And vast amounts of the surveillance, and this has certainly grown in America enormously over the last few years, has been looking at all sorts of people who are campaigners, environmental campaigners and so on. I'm not a fan of conspiracy theories. I would never have believed this if it wasn't for this week. But some of the stuff this week about people who have been under surveillance. Doreen Lawrence, how absurd can that be? That Doreen Lawrence has been under surveillance, was under surveillance. The police actually put someone in the campaign for justice for Stephen Lawrence so that they could find dirt on Doreen Lawrence, one of the most admired people in this country. And throughout that time, of course, the police, quite rightly, were criticised for not doing enough work around finding the murder. It seems they did have time to go and smear her. Even more ridiculous stories about the people who wrote leaflets condemning McDonald's. It turns out that the police had people working with that group who wrote the leaflet that caused the problem. And I find myself having to think, is this true, this story, every time I say it? But it is true, apparently, that there was even people having relationships with the women in the environmental groups to the extent that they fathered a child and then went off, having been doing all this undercover work. It's absurd, and therefore that's a very, very lot of words to say one word: hero.
David Willetts.
Well, we don't know all the facts of the case, but I think probably what Snowden has done is very wrong indeed. And what Mark was doing is confusing two completely different things, because I absolutely agree with what he said about Doreen Lawrence, and I absolutely agree that the accusations on that were deeply shocking, which is why we absolutely have got to get to the bottom of what went wrong with the investigation into the murder of her son. But the completely different case is what we have to do to protect our national security. And when Mark says national security, with just a sort of hint of a sneer, let's be clear what national security means. It means that we can enjoy the Olympics and we can enjoy the Royal Jubilee without being subject to terrorist attack. That's what national security means, and we are all in debt to the agencies, the police, the armed forces, the security agencies that have ensured that we were able to enjoy those great national events in safety. And what's crucial for us is that those activities should be carried out within the framework of law. And the framework of law that governs the activities of those agencies is strong and effective. It means there's a clear set of laws, actually going back to the Major and Blair governments. There are independent legal experts who can check on every operation. There is a parliamentary committee of MPs from all three parties that can assess and investigate anything they wish to assess.
And the scale of American surveillance that he revealed, is that also legitimate and legal and proper?
I simply don't know and could not comment on what goes on in the US. All I can say is in Britain, we all have to comply with the law. There is nobody who is above the law. Our security agencies are not above the law, and the law has to be enforced, and the law is enforced.
Okay. Simon Hughes.
I tend to think that whistleblowers generally are heroes rather than villains in society, Ponting and the Official Secrets Act and all those things. And that you need people sometimes who say, look, the government's going over the top. And I am absolutely with Mark and David on some examples that we have, and they're close to me because people like Dwayne Brooks, I've come to know the Lawrences as a South London MP. It was almost unbelievable, I have to say, almost unbelievable that the police in those days would behave. So that's unacceptable. What we have to do, though, is we've had a difference between the coalition partners, because we have said, as Liberal Democrats, that we are very suspicious of more powers being given to the security services to track correspondence and emails and so on. We fought off the Labour Party doing it with the Big Brother plan for the ID cards and the rest, rightfully in my view. And I think we have to give extra powers very carefully and occasionally. Of course, David Willetts is right. We need security services. Ours do a very good job. I agree with him entirely that I think there is no evidence that our services are not properly accountable or they've acted outside the law. I have no evidence of that. I'm not so sure about the states, and I think we need to be very attentive when people come and tell us that the states may be abusing their powers in ways that have not been authorised either in the states or elsewhere.
And you said at the beginning that you were inclined to think he was a hero. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean...
Yeah?
I mean, I also don't know all the facts.
It's a simple question.
It was a simple question. I think whistleblowers generally, if they are brave enough to make that step, normally have something to say. If they're proved to be frauds, then they're frauds. But we've got to allow... The NHS has benefited from whistleblowers, and we need other people being able to be free to be whistleblowers.
Jill Kirby.
If I had to opt, I'd say villain rather than hero. I think he's been very foolish. I think he's betrayed the trust of his employer. I don't think we should take that lightly. I think also there's we're somewhat confused here. I think Mark's particularly confused about the distinctions between using computer codes to rake through data which no one ever actually gets to look at until the code throws up something significant. And on the whole, I think I'm reassured that security services, both in the States and over here, are using those systems to keep an eye on what's going on in terms of internet traffic. I'm not particularly relaxed about the Snoopers Charter. I'm more with Simon on that. But I think as far as our security is concerned, then we should be thankful that we do actually have a pretty efficient, so far, security service, and we've been spared quite a lot of risks that could otherwise have been much greater threats. And I think that someone like Snowden actually is a bit... He regards himself as a hero, quite clearly. He's also very muddled. He rushed off to Hong Kong, first of all, then Russia, and now he wants to get to Ecuador. I think he thinks he's Julian Assange, actually, and he wants to strut the world stage. I'm rather worried about him as an individual.
So you think he's a villain because he should keep more calm when the whole of American state is chasing him around the world?
I think if he wanted to resign...
He could be a bit more calm and measured about which country he hides in.
Resign his job because he was unhappy about the work he was doing. and maybe talk more freely afterwards about the concerns he had, but I don't think you simply hand papers over to the Guardian newspaper or whoever's prepared to believe you. And I think the Guardian's had some doubt since about some of the stories he's given them. So at the moment, I would say Willen, he's betrayed trust and he's attempted to risk national security, which he should not do lightly. I think it's a very different matter, actually, from a whistleblower in the NHS or from, for example,
we may come to that in a
police
moment.
undercover getting carried away.
You, sir.
Barack Obama said that you can't have 100% security and also 100% liberty. Well, if I wanted 100% security, I would go to jail. But the reason I don't want to go to jail is because liberty and freedom is more valuable than security. And then William Hague said only wrongdoers should be worried. Well, how would he feel if I went to the Foreign Office, I went to his desk, I went to his computer, and then he came in and said, "What on earth are you doing?" And I just said to him, "Only wrongdoers should be worried." How would he feel then?
And you?
Well, I happen to disagree with the majority. I think he is a villain. He is a villain because when he took up the job to work in the Secret Service, he knew what was in the job description, and he should have took that on board before he actually began to blow his whistle, as he would put it.
Okay. Liz Kendall.
I am much more worried about the potential for threats to people caused by terrorism, by this whole network of new groups. It's not the old Cold War. You know, we don't know where these new groups are. I was on the tube 7/7 in London. I had friends with family in Boston when the marathon bombing happened, and I think it is absolutely essential that our security services can monitor and intercept emails, online data and phone calls if they believe it to be a threat. But just as our police need to have the trust of people that they're doing their job properly, and I think the issue about what's happened to the Lawrences is a separate point, our security services need to absolutely act within the framework and the law. The problem is being open about that when it's such sensitive information. People want to know, how do we know that they're following the law if we can't see that out in public? And that is why this group of MPs on the Intelligence and Security Committee is looking at the issue. My only comment about Edward Snowden is I do think it is ironic that he has, as a man who champions free speech, as trying to seek asylum in a country that denies its own citizens free speech.
You got that. A couple more points, going to take another question. Yes, you, sir.
I fail to understand how we can ever have freedom of speech if everything we say is being recorded, everything we say privately, everything we write, every question we ask Google is available to the security services. I don't trust the security services with my bank details, let alone any of that information. How are we supposed to have involved discussions?
I will take one more point from you in the fourth row there.
Yeah, I mean, you say that no one's above the law and that security services have nothing to hide, then why do we need secret courts that the public don't have access to and the press can't comment on? How as a public are we supposed to trust them when there's no open insight into what they do?
We've got time for another question. It's interesting, it's in a way a similar theme. Andrew Hills, who is a doctor, I think. Andrew Hills.
What should be done to those involved in the covering up of incompetency in some areas of the NHS, and how can it be prevented in future?
These are the allegations that reports, particularly on the Morecambe and the children who died in Morecambe, that they were deliberately obscured or covered up, which the people involved, of course, deny happened. Jill Kirby, there is some problem with who looks after those who are looking after quis custodiet.
Yes, and the culture within the CQC seems to have been, at all costs, don't tell the public what's happening in the health service, because they might lose their faith in it if they really knew. And the second principle seems to be, whatever you do, preserve your pension and your payoff, because that's really what you're in the job for. And I think that there are a number of people who are involved at the CQC. As far as we're aware, were involved in deleting reports, making sure the public didn't know what was happening, and actually by virtue of their decision not to make information public, were probably risking further deaths, which they seemed more concerned to cover up than actually allow to become known. I think that actually looking after your own back seems to have been the culture of this particular quango, and that some of the people involved should not be able to retire with the huge public sector pensions which we're all paying for, in order to enjoy the benefits of having a lifetime in a job which has not actually been of any service to anybody.
Do you think it's a one-off, or do you think this is symptomatic of the way quangos can go?
Well, it doesn't seem to have been a one-off in the health service. We seem to have strings of whistleblowers now emerging, some of whom we'd read about before, some of whom are now coming to the fore, and yet at the same time we've been reassured by the man in charge of the health service, David Nicholson, that there are, I think he told a select committee not long ago, there was only one whistleblower he'd ever come across, and now there seem to be umpteen of them. And I'm sure he was well aware, and I'm sure reports will have reached him of concerns being expressed by consultants, by practitioners of different kinds. But I think, you know, we need to know what's happening in this huge organisation. The CQC was clearly not set up on a basis of which it could find out what was happening. Its remit seemed to be largely about reassurance. It seemed to be able to get away with inviting hospitals to inspect themselves and report on themselves. Self-assessment carried to ridiculous extremes. We think we're a hospital doing a good job. That's fine, pat on the head, go off and have another nice lunch. The public has been badly served, but back to the problem that the NHS is a monolithic organisation. It's very difficult to actually supervise every detail of it unless we actually get it into manageable size, accountable units, and people know what's going on.
The one in the second row from the back there, yes.
Yeah, I just wondered what your thoughts are about the market changes that you're trying to enforce into the NHS, whether that will actually have bigger incentives to people to actually cover up issues like this rather than being open and honest.
But if it were market driven?
Yeah, well, I think it's heading that way, and I don't think that incentivises NHS managers to be open and honest. I think introducing more of an element of competition actually could incentivise them to hide things.
If patients can tell everybody where to go and where not to go and find out information about a hospital, recommend it to their friends or not, or indeed if a hospital knows that if it loses patients, in fact kills patients, it might not get any more of them. I mean, those are kind of market responses. You don't go to a supermarket that sells rotten food because you know it's not a good place to buy things. You wouldn't go to a hospital if you could help it.
What about the hamburgers? What about the hamburgers with horse meat in them? What about the hamburgers with the horse meat?
It didn't kill anyone.
Well, all right. The woman there on the gangway.
You encourage people to whistleblow, but most people won't whistleblow because, for the simple fact, they lose the job. They've got everything to lose if they do that. So why encourage it?
Simon Hughes?
Well, I think Andrew's question is really relevant. I have two answers. I think one of the interesting things is the legacy of this government may be to get the best system for an accountable NHS that we've ever had. And I say that having dealt with far too many complaints by individuals that they've not had the service that I always believe the NHS should deliver. The NHS have given my family the most fantastic service, and I'm their biggest fan, but they don't always do it properly. And two things should happen. Firstly, the moment you are sent from your GP to a hospital as an inpatient or outpatient, somebody should be responsible for your care in that hospital and accountable. Named person, and they should make sure everything's delivered. And secondly, we've had far too many chief executives who bluntly don't take responsibility, and when it's discovered that something terrible like Staffordshire has gone, they've moved, they've gone somewhere else.
And what should happen to them, which was Andrew Hill's question?
The answer is they shouldn't be re-employed in the NHS. If you are found not to have done your job properly, may I say so, not on a medical judgment, but in terms of managing the patient care as a consultant, or as a chief executive, or as a clinical director, then bluntly, you should not continue to serve the public on a high salary in the public's name. We've got to change that for once.
Man over there on the right.
The CQC has yet again shown to be completely inept and corrupt. If you want a quango to cut the CQC.
Okay. Mark Steele.
Well, you know, obviously what they did was absolutely disgraceful, and it was a tragedy. It must be just appalling for anyone who's in the families of the people that suffered. But then when I listened to Jill's response to that, I thought that was awful, because what you were doing was not dealing with that tragedy. You were using it as a way of trying to argue that the NHS shouldn't be a public organisation.
No, I wasn't using the tragedy. I was pointing out that a woman who had presided over an organisation which
no, you weren't. You started going on about their pensions and so on, that they don't, that you wouldn't have if you had the market.
That lives were at risk, should retire in a comfortable pension. I think that's a very clear lesson.
Of course they shouldn't. Of course someone who has behaved in that way should just go off and retire on a.
And the very good point the lady made over here about she felt that more market forces would be a bad thing. I was dealing with, and I think it's an important point to answer, that actually some market forces might have prevented these things happening.
Right, then a simple question is to look at two cases where market forces do or did prevail. First of all, in America, where people who come over from America simply can't believe how marvellous the health service is.
Perhaps you could give me a specific example.
And secondly, if you hear anybody, luckily now it's been going so long that you have to go back a long way for this, but if you hear anybody talk about the way the health was delivered before the health service and how extraordinary an innovation it was, and how people simply couldn't believe that they got these things. It doesn't, of course it doesn't excuse. Of course it doesn't excuse them from doing terrible things. But it does mean that the answer to it is not to think, aha, I can use this as a way of arguing that we can privatise the whole thing.
Liz Kendall.
I know from as a constituency MP that sometimes, you know, when people have had something terrible happen to them, they want to make a complaint, and the NHS kind of feels like it's pulling down the shutters and ignoring what they've said, and what those people desperately want is for someone to acknowledge what's happened, be held responsible for it,
Why does that
but
happen,
also to learn the lessons. Well, I think that if you have got a culture where the bosses of an organisation aren't saying, if there's a problem, come forward, tell us about it, let's learn from our mistakes. I mean, in all of our jobs, if you've got a boss who is like that, who says, come forward with a problem, we'll deal with it and sort it for the future.
Why don't they do that?
So you need a leadership. Secondly...
Why don't they do that?
Because I think that people too often end up defending the system. The NHS is all about patients, but we've got to start, let me just say this, at the bedside. It's from the bedside to the boardroom, and regulation is the final bit of the jigsaw. You need to have enough staff who are properly trained, who are always thinking about, am I treating this person how I would want to be treated, or how I would want my mum treated? So I think if we start, we need an effective regulation system, because people need to know, you know, that their hospitals and care homes are safe. But you've got to start with patients at the bedside, and I think transform the amount of information there is available to patients and the public. We started on that with data on stroke and heart disease, but we need to get the information out there so patients can see it and hear their voice.
Okay, David Willetts, we only have a few moments left. Well, it'd be grateful if you keep it brief.
There clearly is a very serious problem with the culture at the Care Quality Commission. That's why we, first of all, changed the senior management, thrown the doors open, have an independent inquiry. Secondly, the Care Quality Commission now, unlike in the past, should have experts who understand medical care inspecting hospitals. We shouldn't have dental technicians doing inspections of hospitals. We shouldn't have people doing a hospital one week and a beauty parlour the next. Each one should be inspected by an expert, and we're delivering that. And thirdly, I have to say, the culture goes back to the previous government. It was all about, we've always got to boost the NHS. We should not confront the challenges. We can confront the challenges while still protecting the principles of the NHS.
I'm afraid...
Absolutely not true.
I'm afraid time's up. Sorry to those of you who still got your hands up. We're going to be in Basildon next week, thinking ahead. We're going to have Danny Alexander there for the Liberal Democrats, Nadine Dorries for the Tories, Margaret Hodge for Labour, and Tony Robinson, the television presenter, also on the panel. If you want to come to Basildon, go to our website. The address is on the screen there. Call 0330 123 99 88, and we'd be Glad to see you. And if you're listening to this on 5 Live, remember you can continue the debate, question time, extra time, right after this programme. Thanks to you on the panel. Thanks to all of you who came here to Newcastle to take place in tonight's programme. Until next Thursday from Question Time, good night.